In the modern world, the idea of the soul has been overwhelmed by the self and its works. The material, the logical, the scientific have so transfixed us, possessed our minds so completely, that often we don't even feel the need to see past them, nor imagine any other reality. But there are some scientists who say that we let this happen at our peril.
I think the key thing about the self is that it can be a very circumscribed phenomenon, and I think it's essential to the idea of the soul that it is not in that way circumscribed. The self in modern life can often be simply an aggregate of present wishes and desires and conscious plans, and can see itself as a functional unit in a very functional world. And I think people have been deceived into thinking that because we are able to understand certain things quite practically for certain purposes so that we can exploit them, we can understand them using a very simple model, a mechanistic model, which is the worst kind of scientific model, that ourselves should follow this pattern.
But whether we like it or not, our materialistic and scientific culture has whittled away at our sense of having an inner core to who and what we are. In last week's programme, we explored the work of Michael Gazzaniga, who believes that our sense of self is simply the result of the left side of our brain creating order out of the jumble of our experiences.
Ultimately, they're circuits. That's the assumption of neuroscience. There's a circuit in there that finds you, the self, always asking the question, why did I do that? What's the meaning of this? It's constantly trying to seek patterns, seek understanding towards our actual behavior, felt states, and all the rest. It's trying to tell a story that's consistent with what's going on. And that becomes the narrative. That becomes the self-story of who we are and what we're doing and how we're interacting throughout life.
So the self, says Gazzaniga, is like a computer chip, tucked away inside our brain, making sense of the confusion of our neural experiences.
That chip, that interpreter chip, that little wiring is in our left hemisphere. I think the subtleties of the human condition in terms of thought and rationality are all left hemisphere-based events. It is the thinking, language-based, hypothesis-generating hemisphere. It is the one that does the heavy lifting for our cognitive life.
It was this sort of reductionism that prompted Ian McGilchrist to study psychiatry. He agreed that the interpreter exists, but believes it is only part of our essence.
Gazzaniga has written about the interpreter and produced some very interesting evidence, which he interprets, it seems to me, in a way that isn't justified by the evidence. He sees it, this interpreter, as being the thing that is actually us and is our consciousness. And it is, for certain purposes, what rules the roost. But it isn't the whole of the self at all. The two hemispheres have evolved to capture a different model, if you like, of the world, to capture a different aspect of existence. And they both have realities that they can show us. The left hemisphere tends to see a thing as bits of things that don't necessarily cohere at all, and is most at home, actually, with things that present themselves as rather novel lumps of little bits. Whereas the right hemisphere has more of a gestalt feel of things. It sees things in the whole rather than simply as parts. It sees things in context. For example, if I say to you, it's rather hot in here, you understand that what I mean is, could you please open the window? That level of understanding of language is what goes on in the right hemisphere. It understands what people mean when they say things, taking into account everything we know. Whereas the left hemisphere is still busy looking words up in the dictionary and putting them together using, it's a bit of a at generalization, but that is the general idea. It's not just language, it's everything that we do. The left brain on its own, left to its own devices, it's like one of those people that you ask directions. They don't know the directions. They're damned they're going to say they don't know the directions. They'd rather tell you to go somewhere else and save the face than actually helpfully say, I don't really know. But it's not in the vocabulary of the left hemisphere, I don't really know. What I'm trying to suggest is that this interpreter in the left hemisphere is a bit of a jumped up individual who has, if you like, taken upon himself to say that this is what the world is, this is the way the world is. Whereas in fact our bodies, our emotions, things that are outside of our consciousness, and so on will quickly tell us that that isn't all that there is.
Once it was in monasteries, not hospitals or labs, where people sought answers to questions of this sort about our mind and our being. The method for such investigation then was prayer. And even in the modern world, pockets of such inquiries still exist.
A lot of prayer is a question of gathering myself back together again. You are trying to focus your attention on awareness and focusing then a little bit on the you that is aware. Now for me this is well, let us call it the soul. Augustine in the Confessions talks about this return into oneself and an awareness of a light above the mind, as it were, which gives a sense for him of God's presence to the mind. But for me the interesting thing is it's by the light of that presence he is aware of anything that is. Awareness is something which is, if you like, metaphysically prior to that of which I am aware.
So in the language of religious experience as well, there are two distinct parts to us. They also believe, behind the busy rational self, there is something else, without which the self cannot exist. The paradox is that it's impossible to see this essential soul directly. We can only sense its presence from what it illuminates.
I understand the idea of soul as something with which I am aware of what is. The intuitive, that with which one has insights.
I think that's a wonderful hypothesis generated by the interpreter to explain some transcendent state someone feels at sometimes. Some people it's jogging, some people it's the evening martini, some people it's meditating, reading a good book, going for a walk. It's great. It's all part of the human story, but I don't think we need another concept for it.
The idea that, there is no, so that's just a nice comforting myth, is exactly what you would expect that hemisphere, that construction of the world to say about it. But it has only one way of looking at things. And in the end, there is no way that you can prove to somebody that there is a soul. You have to make a leap of the imagination, an important idea, which is, I think, essential to all forms of understanding. That you have to take a leap of faith, if you like. That is something that I don't expect somebody who had a rigorously scientific materialist view of the world to hold with, of course. It's not coherent in their terms. I accept that. What I have a problem with is that the left hemisphere tends to have an interest, it seems to me, in keeping what's going on in the other hemisphere quiet. Because it's rather inconvenient having this right hemisphere reminding one that there is another world out there that has allegiances to other things in the spiritual realm. The whole purpose of literature and art, and of course of religion, is to keep in our minds that there are things outside of the world that we have created. That is not a very convenient thing to square with our rational utilitarian system. But in our own time, basically the left hemisphere has, if you like, pissed on the world of the right hemisphere.